Hey guys, tonight we wander down the dusty lanes of Gaza, the headlines version. Not the one you probably know from photos or protests, but a gentler Gaza, a quieter Gaza. Imagine warm evening air clinging to sun-bleached stone, and a postman's sandals slapping gently against the cobbled street. His satchel swings side to side like a lazy pendulum. No rush, no engine noise. Just the occasional donkey braying at a palm tree and the faint clink of a tea glass 2 alleys over. Welcome to Gaza before 1948, where mail travels slowly. Groves stretch for miles. And if you're lucky, the breeze might smell like olives, cardamom, and paper ink. Of course, you probably won't survive this level of sheer, stupefying calm. The only conflict here is whether your letter gets delivered this week or next month. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're rewatching from and what time it is. I'd love to hear which corner of the world you're redozing off in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge softly through the slumbering alleys of early 20th century Gaza. It's a place suspended somewhere, between Ottoman calm and colonial unease, with laundry flapping lazily above like sleepy flags of daily life. And somewhere, amid the faded shutters and stone arches, mail is moving. Not quickly, and not particularly reliably, but it's moving. You hear it before you see it. The faint rustle of paper, the creak of a saddle, the occasional squawk of a pigeon in protest. Postal services in this Gaza are a mashup of donkey, telegraph, walking messenger, and that one cousin who swears he knows someone at the post office in Jaffa. Officially, the Ottomans have a system. Unofficially, you're lucky if your letter doesn't arrive with a hummus stain. Picture this: a young postal runner in a fraying tarbouche hat, barefoot, weaving through the olive groves at dawn. The pouches strapped across his chest aren't for bread or figs, but for envelopes. Some bear neat Arabic calligraphy. Others, French addresses scrawled by pen pals in Paris. The system relies heavily on memory and muscle, neither of which come with a tracking number. There's one dusty office tucked behind Gaza's old mosque, where a board clerk wipes his glasses on the same rag he uses to swat flies. On the table in front of him, a small wooden tray of wax stamps, a cracked inkwell, and a stack of letters smelling faintly of musk, dust, and someone's spilled rosewater. If your handwriting is bad, he'll shake his head, sigh dramatically, and toss your letter into a mysterious box labeled Insha Alawich. You suspect translates to maybe someday. Historians still argue whether Gaza's Ottoman postal service was ever truly functional, or if it was more of a symbolic suggestion, a polite way of saying, look, we're trying, okay? But still, mail mattered. Love letters crossed the Sinai. Business invoices for barrels of olive oil made their slow journey up toward Nablus. Even death notices delivered by hand, sometimes with an apology and a prayer, carried heavy news wrapped in even heavier silence. You could learn the fate of a cousin through a folded scrap of paper, days or weeks after it actually happened. Telegraphs, of course, brought a jolt of speed to all this. A single wire ran through the region like a nervous vein, carrying news faster than any donkey ever could. But it wasn't cheap. You had to go to a designated office where a man behind a desk tapped furiously while sipping thick coffee and occasionally muttering things like, "Why is there no punctuation?" If you were rich, urgent, or both, it worked. If you weren't, well, there was always your cousin, or a passing traveler, or a very persuasive bribe. Quirkier still, some letters were delivered by accident, meant for a different Gaza, or addressed to that man with the big beard near the olive press. Shockingly, this sometimes worked. People knew each other. A letter addressed to Abu Fadi Gaza was somehow enough, even if there were 6 Abu Fades. Here is a sleepy little secret. There were certain streets in Gaza where postmen didn't bother knocking. They'd leave the letter wedged in the doorframe, and the breeze would alert the house. Kids learned to check the cracks before stepping out barefoot. Sometimes you'd wake up to the rustle of an envelope nudging the rug near your door. It felt like magic. Not all letters were mundane either. Rumor has it, one of the town's more eccentric poets would write short verses on the back of his envelopes just in case they fell into the hands of a stranger. A kind of unsolicited literary outreach. One such fragment survives today in a forgotten archive. If the olive tree forgets me, may my ink remember. And there were dangers, too. A few rebellious letters, carefully hidden inside baskets of olives or under embroidered handkerchiefs. Whispered seditious dreams during the waning years of Ottoman rule. Surveillance was real, but inconsistent. A well-placed coin might make a suspicious envelope seem less urgent to open. There's something inherently sleepy about all of it, the slow loop of routine. The gentle persistence of people who believed, somehow, that even if it took 2 weeks or 2 months, their words would land where they were meant to. Whether it was a merchant in Damascus waiting on a price list, or a grandmother in Khan Yunis hoping for a photograph of her new grandson from Haifa, there was trust. Or maybe just patience disguised as hope. Evenings in Gaza came with their own postal soundtrack, the creaking cartwheel of the last delivery mule, the soft call of a mother asking if a letter came today, the wet thump of an ink pad being closed for the night. You sit on a worn stone step and watch the last of the light fade behind the minarets, wondering if someone, somewhere, is holding a piece of paper with your name on it. Or maybe they forgot. Or maybe it's still stuck in a dusty drawer behind a bored clerk's elbow. You stretch your legs, not expecting anything urgent. After all, this is Gaza before urgency. Before speed, before overnight delivery. This is a place where the world breathes slowly and, sometimes, your letter arrives 3 weeks. Late with a new coffee ring, still, it arrives. You wake to the sound of faint tapping, teeny, deliberate. It's not rain, not in this dry season. It's a clerk pressing a wax seal to the flap of an envelope. Hands slow and practiced, face indifferent in that eternal Ottoman postal way. Welcome to another day in Gaza, where even stamps have stories. Stamps here aren't just boring little squares. They're miniature art galleries, tiny flags of empire, and low-key power moves all stuck to the top right corner of your cousin's birthday letter. In late Ottoman Gaza and later under British Mandate rule, stamps changed often. New borders, new kings, new emblems. You could practically track a regime change by the color of the stamp on your water bill. It's history in adhesive form. The first stamps in Gaza. Ottoman ones, printed with fancy Arabic calligraphy, usually in shades of brown or green. Some were misprinted, some rare. One even had a goat hair embedded in the paper. Scholars still argue whether this was an accident or a low-budget security feature. Either way, stamp collectors lose their minds over it. You're standing in front of a modest post office, stone walls cool in the morning shade. Inside, the scent is a mix of melted sealing wax, old ink, and that faint metallic tang of a telegraph wire that's seen better days. A kid from Khan Yunis is at the counter, watching wide-eyed as the clerk carefully moistens a stamp with a sponge. No licking here, too undignified. The clerk presses the stamp down with reverence, as if it's a legal contract between empires, which, in a way, it is. You follow the boy out. He tucks the envelope into his vest, glancing around like he's carrying gold. Maybe he is, if not in money, then in meaning. He's sending news. Maybe an apology. Maybe just a request for a new prayer rug from his uncle in Hebron. The funny thing is, these stamps often didn't survive the journey. Rain fingers, spilled fig, surpenny number of hazards could unstick the little square of paper. And yet, even when the stamp went missing, letters often still got through. People recognized handwriting, or tone, or the slightly panicked way someone wrote your name in all caps. Not every letter had a stamp. Poorer families sometimes passed notes by hand, using a kind of neighborhood relay. A folded piece of paper would travel from baker to grocer to tailor to shepherd until it landed miraculously in the right pocket. No one asked for money, just a quiet favor. Pass this to Ahmad if you see her near the water well. Somehow, she always got it. Then there were the seals. Real ones, not digital security icons or padlocks on a screen, but warm wax, pressed with carved metal or even a family ring. Underneath the wax, gossip. Inside, instructions, or promises, or declarations made late at night, written by lantern light, sealed quickly before the ink dried too fast. Gaza's elite families took their seals seriously. Some even had them carved into olive wood, passed down like heirlooms. One particularly dramatic merchant had his shaped like a lion. You didn't mess with his invoices. You walk now through the back lanes where informal scribes set up tiny writing booths for the illiterate. Under olive trees or beside wells, they dip reed pens into pots of ink and scrawl dictated messages in beautiful Arabic script, often the client's whisper. Not because the contents are scandalous, but because it feels sacred. The act of putting your voice into ink is a kind of ritual. You feel that even the paper has texture. Slightly fibrous, yellowed with age, often cut unevenly. Paper wasn't cheap, but it was treated with care. No crumpling. Letters were folded like linens, tucked into sleeves, stored in drawers that smelled like cloves. You find yourself running a finger along one such envelope, imagining who touched it last. A soldier, a teacher, a young woman in a courtyard at dawn. And here's a weird one for the history books. Gaza had at least one known postal hoarder, an elderly man who never sent any of his letters. Hundreds of sealed envelopes filled his room, carefully stacked in wooden boxes. No one's sure why. Some say he feared interception. Others claim he was waiting for the right time. A few letters were opened after his death, mostly recipes and arguments about property lines. Still, the mystery lingers. In the background, the telegraph wires hum faintly. They've seen Ottoman rule fade and British uniforms take over. The stamps change again. Now they bear stiff portraits of British monarchs and titles like Palestine in English, Arabic, and Hebrew. 3 names, 1 stamp, 1 rising tension. You overhear an older man joke about it in a coffee house. When they can agree on what to call a place, they use all 3. That way, everyone's offended equally. The joke lands soft. People chuckle, but the mood dims for a moment. Even so, daily life continues. Packages are weighed on crooked scales. Children line up to send their first letters. Traders haggle not just over olives and spices, but over who'll carry their invoices to the train station. There's something charmingly inefficient about it all. Nobody's rushing. There's time. The British tried to modernize things, of course. They install new metal mailboxes, hold official hours, issue regulations about stamp placement. Some locals comply. Others just keep using the bakery boy to deliver notes wrapped in newspaper. You pause by one of those red British mailboxes. It looks out of place. Bold, cylindrical thing plopped in the middle of a city that still dreams in stone and clay. There's graffiti scratched into it. A heart, an olive branch, a date. A child tosses in a letter with both hands, like it's a well and he's making a wish. You smile. Then there's the market hallways, the market. Amid crates of oranges, dried fish, and woven baskets, you see a little stall selling stamps. Not for mailing, but collecting. Tiny rows of Ottoman, French, and British stamps clipped carefully to pieces of cloth. The merchant is missing 2 teeth and hums constantly. Want one with a camel on it? He asks. Very lucky. You buy it? Of course you do. As the sun lowers, casting long shadows across the stone roads, you realize something. These stamps and seals and scribes, they're not just part of some clunky, outdated mail system. They're the fingerprints of memory, of connection, of a time when every word had to be chosen carefully, because once it left your hand, it might not come back. You tuck your camel stamp into your pocket, imagining who it might have carried a message to, or from. You pass by the old scribe again. He's just finishing up a love letter for a shy teenager. The kid hands over a coin, then runs off before the ink dries. You almost envy him. Night falls slow and quiet over Gaza, and somewhere, maybe in a drawer, maybe under a sleeping child's head, another envelope rests, waiting to be opened. You wake before the sun, not because of noise. Gaza doesn't roar in this time. It murmurs, but because of birds. Doves, mostly. The kind that flutter through fig trees and coo on rooftop ledges. But today, their calls are joined by the rustle of wind weaving through thousands of olive branches, stretching far beyond the city's edge. It's Olive Grove Day. You walk out barefoot. The early morning earth, cool and grainy underfoot. The groves lie just outside the city proper, where rows of ancient olive trees lean at odd angles, knotted like old fingers in prayer. Some of these trees have been here for centuries. Locals joke that they're older than some of the mosques, and that's only partly a joke. It's not harvest season yet, so there's no frantic picking or pressing, just the regular lull of maintenance, gossip, and shade. Olive groves aren't only for olives. They're Gaza's outdoor living rooms. You spot a group of women seated on low mats, peeling garlic and telling stories, their voices drifting like music. Kids chase each other between trunks, while an old man dozes against one of the broader trees, his walking stick resting like a sentinel beside him. And in this grove, news travels differently. No mailboxes, no stamps. Just mouths, eyes, and memory. Did you hear about the boy from Rafe? One woman asks. I sent a letter to Cairo last month. His cousin says it actually got there. Another leans in, voice lower. Yes, but it was opened. They say the seal was broken. Someone read it. You sip the tea, someone hands you sweet, minty, made over a charcoal fire that's more ash than flame now. Around here, even the smallest bit of news is precious. A package arriving, a wedding invitation sent, a reply from a brother long gone to Haifa. Historians still argue whether these informal Olive Grove circles were more effective than the official mail system. The consensus depends who you ask. Some families trusted the official post, others trusted their neighbor with a good memory and a donkey. And if you needed a letter read to you, well, there was always someone. Not just the scribes in town, we met them under the mosque walls, but in the groves too. Old women with strong voices, men with kind eyes. A boy who learned to read from a cousin and became the grove's unofficial announcer. Dearest mother, he begins, holding the envelope high like a holy scroll. I hope this letter finds you in good health and good bread. The audience claps politely. It doesn't matter that they've heard it 3 times. The olive trees themselves seem to listen. They've seen so many things. Seasons, soldiers, celebrations. You pass one that's been marked with a bit of blue paint. It means it belongs to someone who moved north, or who didn't come back. The tree still stands, still produces. It doesn't care who claims it. The roots here go deep, in both senses. Families gather around their tree every year. Some trees are named. Some trees have stories. Like the one that supposedly grew from a seed carried in a trader's sandal all the way from Greece. Or the tree where a love letter was buried in the hollow of the trunk, sealed inside a jar. The letter never found, but the jar, real. And now it sits in someone's courtyard, holding sugar cubes. There's a quiet joke that Gaza's olive oil could power an empire. And it almost did, exported by the barrel to Jerusalem, Jaffa, even Cairo. Traders shipped it out by camel, mule, and eventually, those clunky British trucks that always broke down halfway to Khan Yunis. More than a few letters rode out with the oil, hidden in the padding of crates, sealed with oil-proof wax. You imagine one of those traders carefully slipping his envelope into the crate, whispering, "Just get this to Teta. Tell her I'm still alive." The quirkiest detail you learn today. Olive oil was occasionally used, not just for food, not just for lanterns, but as a kind of natural ink preservative. Mix it with certain herbs, and suddenly your paper doesn't fade in the heat. Of course, sometimes it also makes it smell like salad. But it's a trade-off. Midday arrives with little ceremony. The sun filters through the branches, dappling the ground with sleepy gold. Someone starts singing a folk tune about a man who sends a letter to his sweetheart by tying it to a turtle. You're not sure if the song is a joke or not? No one seems to know, but they all hum along. You settle into the grove like everyone else, back against bark, fingers idly tracing the dirt. A teenage boy nearby pulls a letter from his pocket. It's been opened and refolded too many times. He reads it again anyway, lips moving silently. It's from his cousin in Jerusalem. They've got trains here, it says, and a British officer who can't pronounce hummus. The boy laughs softly, folds the letter, tucks it back in his pocket like treasure. You think about how many letters have passed through this place, read aloud, read in secret, passed hand to hand like blessings. Paper and pen may be recent, but messages, they've always been here. Scratched into tree trunks, whispered across rows of branches, sung in lullabies. You don't need an envelope when the grove knows your story. There's a woman at the edge of the grove who collects dropped olive leaves, not for oil, but for tea. She believes they help with memory. When asked why, she simply shrugs and says, they've been watching us this whole time. They remember everything. Evening arrives the way it always does in Gaza soft, sideways. With the light turning golden at first, then gently gray. People begin to pack up their baskets. Some letters are being written now, ink slowly soaking into rough paper, sealed with thread until a seal can be found. You watch a mother tie a message to a bundle of olives, not metaphorically, literally. It's a note for her sister up the coast. Tell her the baby walked. Tell her the bread was good this week. And just like that, another chapter is folded into the leaves. You walk back to Wardtown, sandals dusty, skin warm. Behind you, the grove sways slightly in the evening breeze, like it's waving goodbye. Or maybe just rustling with one more secret. By now, the paths of Gaza are familiar under your feet. Your sandals know which cobblestones slope toward the sea, and which alley opens into the spice market before you even turn. But today, your feet lead you elsewhere, toward food or gossip or olive shade, but toward paper, old paper, carried across cities, deserts, and hearts. Today, you follow the satchels. They move quietly, these messengers. Not like grand caravans with flags and trumpets. No, these are the slow, solitary travelers. Men mostly cloaked in dust and silence, slipping between Gaza's low stone houses and high sun, carrying bundles of letters with the weight of entire stories. You picture one now, a wiry fellow with cracked heels, a sharp eye, and a bag full of folded news. He's just arrived from Cairo 4 days on foot. One of them lost to a sandstorm, another to a flat tire on the British truck that broke down somewhere outside El Arish. He limps a little now, not from pain, but from the uneven rhythm of being still after so much motion. In his bag, trade manifests, invitations, complaints, confessions, and 2 poems. One poem is from a schoolteacher in Gaza, sent to her sister in Alexandria. The other from a soldier stationed in Beersheba, written in clumsy Arabic, with smudged ink and the kind of earnest metaphors that only a 19-year-old with a mustache can pull off. Your eyes are like the wells near Khan Yunis, he writes, deep, unmapped, probably filled with frogs. You can't make this stuff up, except someone actually did. And just like that, the city begins to open its little nooks to these arriving messages. Courtyards fill with the soft sound of envelopes being opened. Mothers weep quietly over the curved handwriting of a daughter they haven't seen in 3 years. Merchants squint at updated prices for soap from Beirut. Children giggle over riddles sent by cousins in Jaffa. Gaza may be small, but its letters reach far. Some came from Istanbul, whole weeks of travel stuffed into a creased page. Others from Damascus, Aleppo, Cairo, or even as far as Marseille. The routes were never the same. Sometimes they came with a proper postal stamp, tied to the official lines. Other times, they hitched rides with pilgrims, smugglers, traders, or those quiet men on foot who simply knew how to get from here to there. Historians still argue whether there was a most important route into Gaza, or whether the randomness itself was the brilliance. There was the desert path, hot and haunting. The coastal road, longer but more populated. And then, of course, the British rail line, squeaky, awkward gift of mandate rule that never quite matched its own schedule. You pause outside a modest cafe, its awning sagging slightly. Its tables lined with men sipping bitter coffee and pretending not to watch each other read. It's one of Gaza's informal mail stops. No sign, no office. Just an understanding that if you're expecting news from someone, you check here first. There's a man behind the counter who knows everyone, and more importantly, knows where everyone is. His ledger is entirely in his head. He doesn't charge, but he does accept figs. Today, he's holding on to 3 letters. One's for a seamstress down by the fish market. One's for a baker who moved to Deir al-Bala last spring. The last one, unmarked save for a drawing on the back 2 palm trees and a crescent moon. It's code. Only one person will understand it. You wonder if the writer had time to finish everything they wanted to say. A particularly strange letter once made its way here, all the way from Sudan, folded inside a spice sack. It arrived smelling of cumin and smoke. No stamp, just a smear of charcoal and a name. Somehow, the cafe keeper found the recipient. A woman in her 70s who read it silently, smiled once, then tucked it into her robe. She never told anyone what it said. Gaza's mail system wasn't built on efficiency. It was built on instinct, and maybe a little bit of drama. At least once a year, someone would send a letter addressed only to the one who wronged me. And every time, the postman would hold it up at a local gathering, dramatically reading the opening lines in hopes someone would step forward or squirm. Most didn't, but sometimes they did. And then the real theater began. By afternoon, the narrow lanes began to buzz softly. You pass a young boy running errands with a woven basket balanced on his head. Nestled inside, under a loaf of bread and a folded shawl, is a letter. No one's supposed to know. But of course, everyone does. It's a delivery for a widow who hasn't had mail in 2 years. The whole street is quietly rooting for her. In a small courtyard nearby, a group of women are discussing the latest arrival from Jerusalem. A niece has sent photographs, one of her standing near the Jaffa gate, squinting in the sun. Another of a stranger. She says it's her, the aunt says skeptically, passing the photo around. But he looks like a man who sells rugs. Everyone leans in to inspect. The judgment is swift but gentle. And as the sky shifts into evening shadows stretching long over stone and silence, you find yourself back where the day began. Walking along Gaza's edge. There's a man sitting on a stool near the city gate, watching the road east. His satchel is empty now, but he waits anyway. Maybe for a reply, maybe for permission to leave. Maybe just because this is where messengers go when they have nothing left to carry. You sit beside him. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The wind carries the scent of dust, ink, and olive smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a mule snorts. Somewhere closer, a door creaks open as someone steps out to see if a letter has arrived. It hasn't, but maybe tomorrow. It's just before dawn when you hear the spoons begin to clink. Not harshly, not with the steel-on-steel clang of a diner butt. With that quiet domestic rhythm of Gaza's coffeehouses, a soft clink, a low murmur, the occasional chair scrape. This is where the post travels next, not through dusty streets, but through mouths, through conversation, through steaming cups and sugar cubes and a whole lot of eyebrowers. You step into one of these, more like an open-walled room than anything fancy. The floor is swept, though still gritty. The ceiling fans don't work, but no one cares. The real draw here isn't airflow, it's intel. Inside, the tables are already full. Men in striped galabias nurse tiny glasses of tea like they're made of gold. Someone smokes a narghile, slowly enough to fog an entire corner. But it's not the drink that brings them here, it's the mail, or rather the human version of it. These are Gaza's unofficial postal satellites. Think of them like whispering post offices with mint tea. The latest news arrives through traveling merchants, returning sons, or the occasional leather satchel courier who decides a cup of kawa is worth the detour. And once inside, everything is fair game. You take a seat near the corner, ears open. The conversation goes something like this. Did you hear? Maud's cousin sent a letter from Amman. What did it say? That the British have a new checkpoint near Hebron, theft. They had one last year. This one's just bigger. He also says the post office in Amman uses typewriters now. Lies, unaround, and around it goes. The mail doesn't always need envelopes here. Sometimes the message is the messenger. A boy walks in with news scribbled on the back of a calendar page. He hands it to the coffeehouse owner without a word. The man glances at the handwriting, nods, and tucks it behind a cracked mirror. He'll pass it along when the right person comes. It's in places like this that gossip turns into currency. And gossip, as any sleepy historian will tell you, was often the real mail system in Gaza. A cafe regular might know who's returned from studying in Cairo, who's expecting a parcel from Beirut, who got a reply from an uncle in Hebronand who didn't. Information drips like molasses, slowly but sweetly. You notice the walls too? Covered in old flyers, mismatched portraits, and at least 2 lost goat announcements. But in the far corner, barely clinging to the plaster, is something older. A yellowed envelope, tacked up like an artifact. The ink is faded, the stamp half peeled, but the address is still visible. To the one who dreams of rain. No name, no return. Just that. Nobody talks about it. It's just there, waiting. Historians still argue whether like this were deliberate hubs for passing information or just happened to become that way through proximity and caffeine. Some say the British kept eyes on these places. Others say the British didn't understand a word and gave up. What's known is that from the 1920s onward, Gaza swore where everything unofficial became more official than the post office. And sometimes these messengers weren't men at all. You spot her from across the room, an older woman with a soft scarf and a sharper gaze. She moves from table to table with a tray of sesame sweets, but it's clear she knows more than she sells. She drops a note here, accepts one there. She speaks little, but everyone watches her. She's the almond woman, the man next to you murmurs. She once carried a love letter in her hair, tied it with string, hid it under the cloth, delivered it to cities over without a word. You raise your brows. She also delivers wedding invitations, but that's less impressive. The cafe bursts into laughter when a traveler from Hebron stands and dramatically reads a letter aloud. It's from his brother, half serious, half satire. Dearest fool, it begins. I hope you've learned how to boil an egg by now. The jokes fly. Eggless, helpless, hopeless. Even the almond woman chuckles. These shared readings are common here. When someone's news is good, or too ridiculous to keep private, they offer it up like theater. Even serious letters sometimes get performed. Like the one read last week in trembling tones. A son writing from Damascus about a failed business, asking forgiveness. Everyone listened. No one laughed. It's also in where messengers swap stories. 2 writers compare routes between Gaza and Jerusalem. One claims he saw a leopard. The other insists it was just a very angry goat. They laugh, argue, sip tea, and quietly pass on letters tucked into sleeves. One particularly strange tale. A letter that arrived sealed with soap instead of wax. The writer had run out, apparently. It smelled like lavender for weeks. Nobody threw it away. The postmen in these parts often doubled as something else: traders, scribes, even matchmakers. One legendary messenger is said to have arranged 7 marriages by accident, just by delivering the wrong letters to the wrong recipients. One of those couples is still together. Meant to be, they say, or maybe just too lazy to switch. You wander outside for a moment. The morning sun climbs over Gaza's rooftops. The breeze carries the smell of fresh bread and tobacco. You spot a boy handing a folded paper to the cafe owner. It's from a student at the American school near Jerusalem. They want their report card sent to their grandmother. The cafe man nods solemnly. He'll handle it. Back inside, someone's drawn a crude map on the table in charcoal. It marks a new route, shorter, safer, fewer checkpoints. Others crowd around. A man adds a dot. Here, they'll sell you ink cheap. Another marks a well. Water, but the donkey bites. This is the kind of mail system that doesn't show up in textbooks. No ledgers, no receipts. Just people, memory, and motion. You spend the rest of the morning listening. There's a letter read from Beirut, warning of price hikes in textiles. Another from a daughter in Nablus, asking her mother to send dried lemons. And one final note, whispered from one man to another. He says they might close the road next week. If you want your parcel, send someone now. The cafe begins to thin out by afternoon. Cups are drained. Notes are folded. A man tucks a letter into his sandal strap. Another slides one into the lining of his robe. The almond woman disappears down a side alley, her tray lighter than before. You leave with the sense that Gazas aren't just for tea. They're for letters too fragile for envelopes. 4 words too urgent to wait on stamps. 4 stories that live in the space between a sip and a sigh. And just as you're about to leave, the wind catches that yellowed envelope on the wall. It flutters slightly. No one notices, but you do. The morning light in Gaza is soft, like a blanket draped over the old stone buildings. You hear it before you see it, a low flutter, a coo, and then the unmistakable whoosh of wings overhead. Not seagulls, not sparrows, but pigeons? Specifically, messenger pigeons. Because yes, those dramatic little feathered missiles played a very real part in Gaza's mail history. Today, you're tracing their path. You start your day in a rooftop loft more coupe than home where an elderly man, named Abu Salim, tends to his birds like they're royalty. He feeds them gently, talks to them like old friends, and even tunes into their moods. This one, he says, pointing to a puffed-up gray bird, is mad at me. I gave his wife to another village. You blink. Birdwife, he clarifies. Keep up. Pigeons were, believe it or not, part of Gaza's communication network well into the early 20th century. Particularly prized in wartime and bad weather, when roads turned to mud or checkpoints became unfriendly. These birds didn't just carry messages, they knew the way home. You attach a note, release them into the sky, and they fly straight back to their loft. No GPS, no compass. Just vibes. Abu Salim shows you the tiny metal canister attached to the bird's leg. He opens one, revealing a scrap of paper barely wider than your finger. It reads, "Bread prices up again. Tell Jamal not to come." A full conversation reduced to 9 words. That's pigeon mail. Minimalism at its most efficient. Historians still argue whether Gaza had a fully developed pigeon mail service, or if it was more of an informal system used by traders, scouts, and occasionally nosy ants. But enough accounts survive to suggest that when in doubt, locals turned to the sky. Even during the British Mandate, when radios were introduced, some preferred the birds. "At least pigeons don't ask your religion," one elder jokes. Back on the street, you follow the more traditional postman human ones, wearing sweat-stained vests and sandals that have seen one too many hills. These guys don't fly, but they do know every shortcut, every crooked alley, and every shady spot where you can sneak a nap between deliveries. The etiquette of letters in Gaza, surprisingly formal. Even the sloppiest scrap of folded paper was expected to begin with a Salamu Alaikum and end with at least one blessing. May your olives never shrivel was an actual sign-off. You imagine ending your emails that way? It's oddly comforting. One letter, discovered decades later in a family drawer, read, "To my brother Youssef May, the sun rise gently on your beard. The goat is sick again. The baby walks like a crab. Please write back." The writer clearly had a flair. And there were strict social rules too. If someone handed you a sealed envelope, you didn't shake it, sniff it, or peek. You accepted it with your right hand, pressed it briefly to your chest, and promised, inshallah, to deliver it safely, even if it was just 2 streets over. The act of carrying someone's message was sacred. You were a vessel of trust, not a nosy neighbor. Of course, not everyone obeyed. There was always that one guy, Bu Khalud, the butcher, who once opened a letter meant for his cousin, read it aloud in the market, and became the topic of family feuds for 3 years. He still insists he thought it was for him. The fact that it began with "to the most beautiful girl in Gaza" did not sway his defense. You walk now into a small courtyard where a group of teenage boys are learning calligraphy, not for art, but for clarity. The post office had rules: write clearly or risk delay. So, the boys practice elegant Nask script, writing made-up addresses like the man who smells of soap near the olive press, second door. You chuckle, but they're serious. Could be enough. Nearby, a woman shows you a bundle of old letters tied with blue ribbon. Some are from her husband, sent during the war years. Others are from a cousin in Hebron. But one, she says, was found mysteriously on her windowsill one morning. No stamp, no signature, just a poem. When you crush the olive, do not forget the branch. I remember your laughter. She doesn't know who wrote it, but she's kept it for 30 years. And sometimes, letters weren't meant to be delivered. There were messages buried in fig trees, notes scratched into clay pots before firing. Even one strange case where a love letter was etched into the inside of a brass bracelet. No mailman required. Just a glance. Back in the city center, the post office itself is bustling in its own slow-motion way. A man argues with the clerk about a missing package. The clerk, unimpressed, offers him tea. Someone is trying to mail a fish wrapped in newspaper. The clerk, again unimpressed, tells him to write home about the fish, not send the fish. You slip behind the counter and peek at the dead letter drawer. It's a wooden box filled with orphaned messages, no return address, no clear recipient, some with only drawings. One envelope simply says, "For whoever needs this today." Inside, a prayer and a tiny pressed flower. And there's that fringe tidbit. One postman, sometime around 1935, reportedly trained a goat to carry letters. A real goat wore a little pouch, worked twice, then ate the 3rd letter. Career ended. Still, you can't help but respect the creativity. As the day folds into evening, pigeons return overhead. You watch one circle 3 times, then dive into its coop. Another message delivered. Someone, somewhere, has just received 2 sentences and a whole lot of hope. And down on the street, a boy approaches you. He hands you a folded paper, grinning. "You drop this," he says. Though you know you didn't, you unfold it. May your sleep be long and your worries fly away. No stamp, no sender. But maybe some letters don't need either. The sound of waves isn't loud here, it's more like a background sigh. You follow it down the coast, past crumbling stone walls and fishermen's shacks patched with tin and patience. Today, your journey slips onto the water. Letters didn't always travel by road or by pigeon. Sometimes they went by sea. Gaza's coastline is short, but rich. The kind of place where salt clings to your lips and stories cling to the hulls of boats. Before 1948, the port of Gaza wasn't exactly bustling it. Wasn't Jaffa or Haifa, but it was busy enough for wooden dhows and sailboats to drift in and out like clockwork. And some of them carried mail. Not official mail, necessarily. The British didn't run a full seaport postal service from Gaza. But Gaza's people, they made it work anyway. A merchant heading to Alexandria would take a few wrapped notes. A fisherman might deliver a sealed envelope along with his morning catch. Sea mail, it turns out, ran more on trust than on timetables. You meet one of those old captains, now Captain Yannis, who smells faintly of anchovies and clove cigarettes. He's sitting cross-legged on a flipped-over crate, mending a net with fingers that remember more than he says out loud. You ask if he ever carried letters. Hundreds, he says, without looking up. Mostly love, a few lies, one recipe. He chuckles, but they all reached. The boats weren't labeled mailboats, but everyone knew which ones to approach. There'd be a nod, a coin passed hand to hand, a name whispered quietly. For my cousin in Port Said, she'd be waiting by the dock with a red scarf. And with that, the message would vanish into the tide. There's a fringe story Captain Yannis tells that makes you blink. Once, during a week when sea travel was banned due to storms and British patrols, a group of boys built a makeshift raft just to deliver 3 letters to Khan Yunis by sea. It barely floated. The letters arrived, soaked but legible. The raft, lost forever, presumably dining with the fish. You laugh, but he's serious. That's how badly people wanted to be heard. Inside the harbor, warehouses long, low buildings smelling of brine and old wood bundles of goods sit waiting for pickup. Dates from Jericho, soap from Nablus, and sometimes tucked in cloth or cans. Folded letters meant to move invisibly. Traders used a variety of clever tricks. Double-layered scrolls. Hidden pouches in spice sacks. One merchant famously hid notes inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. You imagine someone at the other end slicing through a crusty loaf and finding not a raisin, but a confession. Historians still argue whether any organized maritime mail existed here or if it was purely informal, a grassroots network of favors and habit. Either way, it worked. Letters moved. News arrived. And Gaza's coast became not just a fishing zone, but a current of connection. You find yourself watching a small boat being loaded now. It's modest wooden, no engine, patched in 3 places. 2 young men tie bundles to the deck, while a third carries a satchel. You spot it. The satchel contains notes. One peeks out, tied with a red thread. No stamp, no address. Just a phrase scrawled on the back. May the wind remember where I belong. That's the thing about mail by sea. It never guaranteed arrival, but it guaranteed intention. Someone cared enough to risk the waves. There were mishaps, of course. Letters swallowed by the sea. Messages delayed by piracies, real ones. At least once, a British patrol confiscated a load of suspicious paper, only to discover it was wedding invitations. Everyone got a stern talking to. The weddings went on anyway. And let's not forget the bottles. Ah, yes, the infamous bottle letters, usually a last resort or an act of hopeless romance. Glass bottles stuffed with scraps of paper thrown into the sea with prayers. Some were found, most weren't, but one retrieved decades later by a beachcomber near Ashdod contained only these words: I forgive you. Simple, final, and still a mystery. You walk now along the beach, your feet sinking slightly in the wet sand. Children run past you, laughing, tossing shells. An older man walks with a cane, pausing to scan the tide line. He's not looking for treasure, he's looking for messages. One of the quirkiest traditions. Some families used to mark their sea letters with perfumed oil, so the recipient could identify it even if it was water-stained. Imagine sniffing a parcel and saying, ah yes, this one's from Aunt Layla, always Jasmine. But eventually, the rhythms changed. The British tightened regulations. The coast grew more watched. Sea mail became more poetic than practical. Boats were inspected. Letters were confiscated or delayed. The sea didn't stop whispering, but it no longer carried secrets the way it once had. Still, the memory lingers. You pause to sit on a rock worn smooth by salt and time. A seagull screams overhead, dignant, probably, but you're too lost in thought to care. You picture the old days, a boat disappearing into the blue, a folded note in its hold. A woman waiting by the shore, shielding her eyes, watching for news, or love, or truth. Someone once said, "The sea keeps the messages we're not brave enough to send." You wonder how many unsent letters lie beneath these waves. By dusk, the light turns silver, then purple, then gone. Fishermen pull in nets, the last boat ties off, and somewhere far out, a floating bottle bobs quietly, unnoticed. You leave the coast with sand between your toes and a strange ache in your chest, not sadness exactly. Just that feeling that somewhere, someone once wrote something they weren't sure would ever be read. And that's kind of beautiful. The smell hits you before anything else sinks in paper, slightly sweet, slightly bitter, with the unmistakable bite of dust that clings to anything stored too long in the dark. Today, your feet take you to a place quieter than thee and slower than the docks. The scribe's desk. Not all of Gaza's letters were written by the people who sent them. In fact, before widespread literacy, many weren't. That's where the scribes came in, part secretaries, part poets, part psychologists. You spot one now, sitting cross-legged in a shaded alley just beyond the mosque, under a weathered awning pinned up with nails and optimism. His wooden desk is cracked. His pen is still sharp. He doesn't look up as you approach. He's busy, composing a letter dictated by a man standing beside him, palms clasped, nervous. To my cousin Mahmoud, the man begins, and the scribe's pen starts to glide. No hesitation, just rhythm. The figs you sent were appreciated. Mother sends her prayers. I remind you of the debt. No pressure, but timely payment would honor our shared name. The scribe doesn't flinch. He's written this kind of letter before. And that's the thing about scribes. They knew what to say, or at least how to say it. You might bring them a tangled thought, grief, envy, reject. They would return it to you as polished prose, with a dash of flattery and the right number of religious invocations. There's a fringe story you hear about one scribe who wrote such beautiful love letters that he was eventually banned from weddings. Too many broken hearts, apparently. His pen had a reputation for stealing affections. One groom even insisted on checking his incoming mail for excessive metaphor. But beyond gossip, these scribes were essential. You sit nearby as an older woman approaches the desk. She hands over a pouch containing 2 coins and a single word. Basel. The scribe nods and waits. She begins slowly. He left without saying goodbye. The scribe raises an eyebrow, pen still. She clarifies. My son. He went to work in Haifa. He forgot to write. This is me, reminding him. He nods again and begins to write. Carefully, respectfully, but there's edge beneath the ink. To my beloved son Basel, I trust the days are kind and that your hands are strong. Here, the lemons are ripening. The neighbor's goat is as annoying as ever. Your room smells the same. I pray you remember us, or at least that your pen does. With a mother's love and mild disappointment, Basel. You glance over and catch her tiny smile. The scribe seals it with a scrap of wax. It'll reach him, he says, as if the certainty is part of the fee. These writers had their own rules. No judging, no changing the truth less absolutely necessary for dignity. And they often knew more about the sender than the sender wanted to admit. You're writing to your brother, one might say, but your tone is for your enemy. Want to soften it? And just like that, generations of feuds were prevented or delayed. Historians still argue whether the scribes of Gaza had formal training or if they were simply the most literate men in their neighborhoods. Either way, their desks became confessionals, debate halls, and sometimes comic stages. One young man brings a draft letter to the scribe for feedback. It begins with, "I saw you at the market and my soul fell into my shoes." The scribe chuckles and edits. "Try your presence caught my heart like a hook in the sea." Less embarrassing. Same message. You learn that some scribes had specialties. One was known for business correspondence, clear, formal, firm. Another for condolences, flowery, delicate, just the right amount of sorrow. And then there were the romantic ones. You could spot their letters a mile away, folded neatly, sprinkled with perfume, usually sealed with thread. The paper itself mattered too. Some scribes imported it from Nablus or Jerusalem, thicker stock, smoother for the pen. Others reused scraps. Ink could be bought, made, or borrowed. One recipe involved soot, gum, Arabic, and pomegranate rind. Smelled awful. Worked beautifully. You walk now toward a quieter corner of the market, where a retired scribe named Caliph keeps a small archive. It's not public, but today he lets you see it. Inside a locked cabinet are dozens of old letters he couldn't bear to throw away. Names scratched out, addresses faded, but the words remain. You read one, brittle and brown. To the stranger who left the red scarf behind. "I saw you once near the mosque gate. I do not know your name, but I carry your image like a small flame in my pocket. If this letter finds no one, then let the paper forgive me." A passerby, no reply, of course, but Caliph keeps it in the maybe drawer. And then there's a true oddity. A letter addressed to the moon. No stamp, just a drawing of a crescent and the words, "You see us all. Tell him I forgive him. Whisper it when he sleeps." Whoever he was, he never knew. But the letter remains, moon and all. As dusk creeps in, the scribes pack up. Pens wiped, paper stacked, a final envelope handed off. You hear one last dictation before the shutters close. "To the boy who keeps asking about my jam recipe, fine, I will write it once. But if your jam turns out lumpy, it's not my fault." You grin, because even the simplest note jam goats, gossip is part of this larger chain, a human desire to be heard. And the scribes. They were the translators of that desire. As you walk home, a breeze picks up. You imagine letters in the airwards drifting from one rooftop to another, gently landing where they're needed. Not every message finds its mark, but some do. And those are enough. You wake to the sound of wheels, creaky wooden ones grinding across uneven stone, a clatter of hooves that sound almost bored. Today's rhythm is different. Less about feelings, more about business, trade, delivery. Packages wrapped in burlap and tied with fraying twine. This morning, Gaza is a post office and a marketplace all at once. You follow the sound into the heart of the old town, where the caravanserai stirs to life. This place, in part warehouse, part gossip factory, has seen countless comings and goings. It smells of straw, olive oil, and worn-out boots. And today, it's brimming with motion. A long-bearded merchant from Nablus unloads 3 crates of soap, each one stenciled with the word Saboon. And balanced on top of those fragrant bricks, a bundle of letters tied in blue cloth. He shrugs as he hands them to the hostler. From the hills, he mutters, "Mostly receipts. And one love note, I think." Smelled too nice to be business. Postal systems in pre-1948 Gaza didn't just run on paper and ink. They ran on trade. You couldn't separate a letter from a shipment or a message from a merchant. The same donkey that carried sacks of lentils might also carry a wedding invitation. A trader en route to Hebron might tuck 10 envelopes under his vestine for others, one for himself. And it made perfect sense. After all, trade routes were stable, familiar, mapped, and manned. And if you were already sending goods, why not send a little news? Historians still argue whether this system was formal enough to be considered a proper postal network. But ask anyone from Gaza at the time, and they'd say, "Who needs stamps? when you have trust. You wander now through the souk, where letters once changed hands beside spices, shoes, and copper pots. A spice vendor proudly points to a stack of neatly folded pages. "Fear my cousin in Aleppo," he says, fanning them like cards. He writes more than he sells. One letter mentions a drought. Another warns of bandits along the Damascus road. And a third, slipped between two receipts, contains a riddle. What grows without rain, sings without a voice, and dies in ink? The answer is, it's probably poetry, or maybe gossip. Either way, the souk is full of both. Trade wasn't just economic hit, was narrative. With every shipment came stories, and sometimes literal notes. One particularly odd tradition: traders would write cryptic messages on the underside of their crates, not to be read by customs agents or port guards, but by the recipients alone. You hear of one crate marked only with, "Tell the red scarf I remember." Who the red scarf was, nobody knows. But the message got through. A boy runs past you, balancing a clay jar on his head, tucked beneath its lid. A scrap of paper. The delivery method. Deceptively brilliant. Nobody suspects a water jug of harboring news. And should it break, well, at least the message died hydrated. Gaza's reputation as a trade hub meant its postal routes extended far beyond what maps suggest. From Cairo to Damascus, merchants knew that a message routed through Gaza was likely to arrive faster than through official channels. One Turkish trader famously bypassed the Ottoman post system entirely, sending correspondence via soap caravans. Faster than the empire, he joked, and smells better. There's a fringe tale about a merchant who created a secret pocket postal route. He trained his camels to stop at specific homes along the trade path. Between Beersheba and Gaza, letters would be handed out through trapdoors in the saddlebags. The camel didn't read, obviously, but she had a perfect sense of routine. Her name, Yasmin. Her story, a legend. You pause at a tea vendor who's just received a parcel. It's wrapped in palm bark and smells faintly of cinnamon. Inside is a letter from a cousin in Jerusalem, updating him on tea prices, border rumors, and crucially a new blend with cardamom that's apparently life-changing. This is business and mail, inseparable. And the blend, if you're curious, really is excellent. Even the customs men knew how to read more than just manifests. One tells you he once intercepted a package labeled clothing, opened it, and found 2 pairs of socks and a secret letter sewn into the hem. To a soldier near Gaza, it read, "If you're still breathing, I forgive everything." He resealed the socks and let them pass. By mid-afternoon, you visit one of the larger merchant houses, where ledgers are thicker than loaves of bread and the ink never truly dries. An accountant lets you leaf through a bundle of correspondences mostly about prices, weather patterns, and freight errors. But one page stands out. It ends not with figures, but with a small note. "Tell her I saw the necklace in the window. She still wants it, I will return." Even amidst numbers, heart still spoke. You learn that in some seasons, postal trade nearly outpaced commerce. Letters became so common in spice sacks and fabric rolls that merchants began marking them with coded threads: blue for personal, red for urgent, yellow for hide this if the British ask. It wasn't foolproof, but it worked often enough. And occasionally, the goods themselves became the message. One woman received a basket of dried figs from her brother and saved. No letter, no note. But inside the fig at the center, carved ever so delicately, was a name. Her name he hadn't written, but he had remembered. As the sun begins to lower, the caravanserai prepares for another departure. A new caravan is forming: 2 carts, 4 donkeys, a dozen crates. A man tucks a letter into a shoebox. Another seals one into a can of preserved lemons. And one woman, eyes shining, whispers instructions to a driver. If you see a man in Hebron with a missing front tooth and a green scarf, give him this. You don't ask what's in the envelope, but you smile as the cart begins to roll away. By the time you return to the edge of town, the souk is quieting. The smell of roasting chickpeas drifts through the air. Someone is writing a note on the back of a grain invoice. Another is wrapping a cloth around a stack of envelopes, tying it with a shoelace. The trade routes are ready to breathe again tomorrow. And you leave with the understanding that in Gaza, the post was never a building or a stamp. It was motion. It was barter. It was trust packed gently between apricots and soap. The alleyways grow narrower as you walk, the walls closer, the voices softer. Gaza, in this corner, is no longer busy. It breathes low. You find yourself in a neighborhood that seems paused in time, where shutters close gently, where cats nap with unearned confidence, and where the quiet hum of routine still holds something ancient. Here, letters weren't only carried between cities or whispered through some never left the street, and yet they carried just as much weight. Today, you're sinking into the smallest mail routes, the intimate, invisible currents of everyday Gaza life before 1948. Not the packages or crates, not the merchants or pigeons, but the whispers passed between balconies, the folded notes dropped over garden walls, the unspoken understanding that everyone was, in one way or another, a courier. You walk past two neighboring homes. They've stood side by side for decades, worn but proud, and between them, a clothesline. At first glance, just laundry. But look closer. Clipped to a towel with a wooden peg, a note. It reads, "I used your pan. I'll return it cleaner." You smile. There it is, domestic postal service. In pre-1948 Gaza, neighborhoods were woven from mutual dependence. Water, bread, tools, and words. Sometimes the postman didn't wear a uniform. Sometimes she wore an apron. Sometimes he was 6 years old and delivering a note for his grandmother in exchange for figs. You meet one such messenger, now well, he was one. He's in his 80s now, sitting with a mint tea and 2 hearing aids. But when you ask about neighborhood letters, his face lights up. "Oh, I was fast," he grins. "Barefoot and full of sugar. I knew who was fighting, who was flirting, and who owed bread." His favorite delivery? A note from a girl to her sister next door, written on the inside of a cigarette box. "Just for words." He smiled at me. The reply, written on the torn corner of a newspaper. "He has no teeth." You laugh. So does he. Historians still argue whether these micro-exchanges can truly be called a postal culture. But what else do you call it when a city's people develop a whole secret system for staying in touch within just a few hundred feet? Women would send recipes by child-run relay. Grandparents would pass blessings via market baskets. Even feuds had their own etiquette. One family might return a neighbor's borrowed bowl with a note that said, "Thank you for the lentils. I hope the salt reminded you of how you spoke last week." The kids, of course, loved it. Message running was currency. A slice of melon for delivering a letter. A promise of marbles if you didn't peek. They zipped through alleys like bees, collecting secrets, arguments, and the occasional biscuit. You peek into a courtyard now, where a string is tied between 2 trees, makeshift mail between cousins. Tied to it with a clothespin is a drawing. 2 camels, one with sunglasses. No signature, but clearly a message. "I'm bored. Let's play." This isn't just child's play, though. Some messages carried weight. One elderly woman tells you about a note passed under her door the night her son was arrested during the British raids. It read simply, "Stay quiet. Light no candles. No name, no signature. Just a warning." She still keeps it folded in her Quran. And then there were the household ledger's family books kept tucked in drawers, where neighbors' IOUs were written alongside notes like, "Fatima took sugar on Tuesday." Whole conversations existed on these dusty pages. One entry reads, "Returned 2 eggs. Replaced missing prayer bead. Apologized twice." She's still angry. You pause at a low stone wall where someone has left a scrap of cloth pinned beneath a rock. You lift it, a message stitched in red thread. The olives are ready. Nothing more. No address. But whoever it's for, they'll know. In some parts of the city, older women created their own postal chain during Ramadan. Each night, as they delivered plates of food to neighbors, they would tuck messages beneath the lid's advice, prayers, even jokes. It became an unspoken tradition. Say nothing, just pass the dish and the note. One plate, found years later in a cabinet, still had a note stuck beneath. You made too much rice. Again? There's a fringe story you overhear in the bakery about two rival families who hadn't spoken in months. But every morning, their sons would trade notes through the bread cart. Eventually, the notes became drawings, then jokes, then apology letters written in crayon. The feud ended when the youngest boy delivered a loaf of bread shaped like a heart. No one knows if it was on purpose, doesn't matter. It worked. You meet a former midwife next, who says she used to carry dozens of messages, births, announcements, prayer requests, questions like, "Is it true what she said about my sister?" The mothers trusted her. Not because she had a badge, but because she remembered. The post is whoever people trust, she tells you. And sometimes, that's just the woman who shows up when your child won't stop crying. By late afternoon, you wander through a quiet alley where notes are still passed in the old way. Under stones, in cracks in the wall, tucked in potted basil plants. One reads, "Meet at dusk by the fig tree." Another says, "Take the long road. Soldiers near the square." Another simply has a verse of poetry. "If the road ends, wait for me there." And some aren't written at all. One old man shows you how they used stones ranged in a certain shape at someone's doorstep to mean different things. A triangle of pebbles meant, "All is well." A small line of 3 meant, "I need help." A circle with a single stone inside meant, "Come alone." Primitive, maybe. But when you have to say something without saying it, you get creative. You linger now outside a crumbling courtyard wall where someone has scratched a message with a nail. It says, "I'll always be waiting here, even if I'm not." The wall is faded, the scratchings nearly erased by sun and time. But it's still legible, and somehow still true. These were the messages that didn't cross borders. They crossed thresholds, porches, balconies, but they mattered just as much. And tonight, as the lamps begin to glow behind shutters, you can imagine those little messengers still at work. A boy slipping a note under a neighbor's pot, a girl drawing a reply in the dust, a cat knocking over a rock, revealing a secret. This was Gaza's closest mail system. No stamps, no seals, just proximity, familiarity, and quiet urgency. The kind of communication that needs no distance to be meaningful. The sky is streaked with gold now, and Gaza begins to hum in a slower key. You move from alleyways and doorsteps towards something larger, older, less about letters, more about messages carved into time itself. Not written with ink, but with sweat. Not sent in envelopes, but wrapped in rhythm. You're heading into the realm of memory keepers, the oral messengers, the ones who delivered the past again and again without ever licking a stamp. In pre-1948 Gaza, not every message was written. In fact, many of the most important ones weren't. Before the letters, before the parcels and pigeons, there were the storytellers, the singers, and the coffee house reciters. And they were just as crucial to how information traveled. You arrive at a modest cafe, tucked between the mosque and a mechanic's yard. Inside, men sip tiny cups of thick, bitter coffee, while a boy with a wooden stool makes his rounds. But all eyes are on the man in the corner, seated cross-legged on a faded cushion. His voice rises and dips like a boat on water. He's telling the news, but not in any way you'd recognize from a radio. He recites it like legend, double quotes, ... And when the price of wheat rose, old Abu Fahmy swore on his beard he would never eat bread again. He lasted one day. His wife caught him with crumbs in his mustache. Laughter bubbles from the corners of the cafe. But hidden in the joke is the fact. Food prices are up. The message has landed. This man isn't reading from a page. He's reciting from memory and from rhythm. These storytellers, part performer, part postman, memorized messages and updates, turning them into little epics. Some were gossip, some were politics. Some were warnings, hidden in proverbs and parables. One fringe tale describes a man who disguised rebellion updates as love poems. Every metaphor about longing was code for resistance. My heart burns like the summer soil meant. They're raiding again. I wait at night by the olive tree meant, safe to gather after sunset. Historians still argue whether this poetic mail counts as real communication or just folklore. But when words move people, what else could it be? You sit near the corner and sip coffee as a young girl enters carrying a tambourine. She begins a simple song, just a few lines, but within it is a real-time message. The British are inspecting the wheat stalls tomorrow. Hide the overstock. Spread the word. Not everyone listens closely, but the ones who need to. They hear. In markets, another form of message moves rhythmic callouts from vendors that carry local news like a side dish. Fish is fresh, barley is not, and don't marry a man with bad shoes. It's part joke, but also not. A vendor might shout about a missing donkey in the same breath as his price for turnips. 10 coins a bunch. Also, Rafiq's daughter got engaged. You laugh, you can't help it. The messaging system here wears its humor like perfume. Even in announcements of sorrow, there's a cadence designed to keep you listening. You cross now to a courtyard where an old woman sits weaving. Her fingers never stop, but her mouth is moving too. She's recounting births and deaths from the last 2 months, weaving them into a lullaby for the children playing nearby. She doesn't write anything down. She doesn't need to. You ask her how she remembers it all. She shrugs. I forget faces, but I never forget a rhyme. And then she adds, also, people talk too much. You just have to listen. You stroll to the edge of town where shepherds gather in the evening to trade jokes, news, and songs. One plays a Naya reed flute while another hums a tune that's been used to announce marriages for decades. When a neighbor hears that melody drifting over the hills, they know. Someone said yes. Even animals were part of the messaging web. A particular dog's bark signaled the arrival of a delivery boy. A rooster trained to crow at noon helped neighbors time their calls to prayer. And one truly strange tale. A parrot owned by a spice vendor who repeated the phrase, "Tell her it's cumin, not cinnamon." No one knows who her was. The mystery remains unsolved. But human memory was the main courier. In every village near Gaza, there was someone, an aunt, an elder, a midwife who remembered who was born when, who married whom, who owed eggs, and who should really write home more often. You meet a former seamstress who is also the town's informal archivist. People would come to her not for buttons, but for details. What year was the big locust swarm? Was Amina pregnant before Eid or after? Did Uncle Tarek actually fight in the war, or just say he did? She'd answer between stitches. At a nearby school, you meet a retired teacher who used chalk and slates not just for math, but for letter writing lessons. He says some of his students' first letters weren't to relatives, but to themselves. So they'd remember who they wanted to become. He still keeps a few. One reads, "Dear me, don't forget to feed the cat, and also to be brave." You pause at that, 'cause here's the heart of it. Before phones, before easy travel, before paper even reached every household, people found a way. They carried knowledge, not in bags, in bodies, in breath. A grandmother's lullaby carried medical history. A butcher's joke hinted at last week's arrests. A love song at a wedding turned into a whispered code passed 3 towns over. Gaza's oral network wasn't just clever, was elegant. And then, at the edge of twilight, something quiet happens. You're walking past a well when you hear an old man humming. The melody is strange, slow, rising, and then it hits you. It's a calendar. He's singing the months. In verse, each line marks a season, a harvest, a migration. You realize he's not just remembering for himself. He's transmitting, keeping track, delivering time to the next generation, one line at a time. And you're just lucky to be listening. Tonight, the wind has teeth. You pull your scarf a little tighter as you walk past the edge of the old city toward the hills where the air gets drier, the shadows longer, and the voices quieter. Here, away from the murmuring markets and the clink of coffee cups, Gaza becomes something different, something heavier, something watched. You're entering the world of restricted messages, letters that took detours, notes that disappeared, and the kind of silence that was sometimes louder than anything else. Because not every letter in Gaza before 1948 reached its destination. Some were intercepted, others deliberately delayed. A few were never written out aloud of fear, or wisdom, or exhaustion. You pass an old police station Nottingham on bones with British teeth. The stones here hold the echo of boots and ledgers, of open parcels and ink's stamped suspicion. The British Mandate authorities kept a close eye on mail, especially after uprisings. Especially when someone somewhere said the wrong thing to the wrong uncle. You find a file clerk now, retired but still in love with paper. T remembers it all. "Oh yes," he mutters, sipping tea so slowly you suspect he's doing it just to be dramatic. They opened letters, folded them carefully. Sometimes not so carefully. One time they resealed a marriage proposal with chewing gum. The message still arrived. The marriage didn't happen. Not because of the gum, probably. Censorship wasn't just about reading private notes. It was about timing. Delay the letter and you shift the story. Hold a message for 3 weeks and a revolution shrinks back into a rumor. People learned quickly. If you wanted something delivered, you'd better find a route the postmaster didn't know about. And so, the shadow post was born. Historians still argue whether this term is too dramatic, but locals had no doubt. Letters moved through back doors, olive groves, and cousin networks. One particular path known only to shepherds ran from Beit Lahia to Gaza's eastern quarters. Letters sewn into sheep's wool. Yes, really. One man received a birthday note hidden beneath a matted patch on a particularly cranky ram. You meet his nephew now. He still keeps that note, though the sheep is long gone. It reads, "I miss your voice. I hope your knees don't hurt this winter. Don't let them forget you." The sheep had no opinion. But not all secret letters were so tender. One letter found buried in a jar behind a well-contained, hand-drawn diagrams. Circles, arrows, names. It was never delivered. The British found it by accident while looking for wine, according to one archivist. That story's half funny, half ominous. Like most of Gaza's postal past. You walk now through an abandoned courtyard, where, long ago, someone carved a message in the base of a fig tree. Just initials, 2 sets, no date. Below them, faint scratches that might have once formed a sentence. Locals say it once read, "If they come, burn this." No one ever did. The tree still stands. You visit an elderly woman who once acted as a human letterbox. Her home, whitewashed and quiet, was a transit point. Someone would knock twice, hand her a folded note with no name, and say only, "For the Olive House." She would nod, and eventually, someone else would collect it. "Did you read them?" you ask. "Only when they smelled like betrayal," she answers, then adds, "or when I was bored." One message she remembers clearly. The songbird is awake. Red ink, tomorrow. She never found out what it meant, but I wore blue that day, just in case. Gaza's secret networks relied on more than just hidden pockets and clever codes. They relied on trust and performance. One teacher tells you how he taught grammar by day and copied forbidden pamphlets by night, hiding them in hollowed-out textbooks. He claims he once passed a message all the way to Ramallah using only math homework. You don't ask for details, he just winks. There's a fringe theory you hear whispered in the back of a tailor's shop, that a well-known baker in the old city used different shapes of bread as signals. Round loaves meant safe, oblong meant wait, braided meant go now. It's ridiculous, and yet you begin to wonder. People have hidden messages in stranger places. Some letters didn't use paper at all. In one quiet corner of town, you're shown a tile floor. The third tile from the left was loose. Underneath, people left notes, some folded, some scratched into the stone itself. One note remains. The sky is clear. No planes. Tonight, you look up instinctively. The sky is cloudy now. But the weight of the question lingers, and some messages, they were meant to be erased. You hear of lovers who wrote on steamed glass, on sand at dawn, on skin with rosewater that faded by evening. Words designed to vanish. But even silence in this context was a message. One that sometimes meant more than any delivery. Historians debate how many messages were lost to fear. But the oral history says thousands. Mothers who told their children, "Don't write that down." Friends who refused to name names in ink. Entire conversations spoken only in eye contact. And then there were the letters that were never meant to be read. You visit a family who kept an entire bundle of unopened mail, 47 letters stacked and tied with a black ribbon, addressed to a cousin who disappeared during the 1936 revolts. They kept writing, hoping, even when they knew. They never opened them. They were for him, not us, the daughter explains. You nod. And you understand now that in Gaza, a letter's presence could matter more than its contents. As you head back toward the old city's lights, you pass a wall etched with tiny script. It's barely legible now, but someone once scratched a poem into the plaster, one line at a time, each night for a week. You read the final line. If this is erased, I'll write it again and again. And that's the story of Gaza's shadow post, not just letters, but persistence. Not just ink, but memory. Not just paper, but people who found ways to say things even when the world told them not to. You exhale, the wind has calmed, but the messages remain. The morning sun in Gaza rolls in golden, low and gentle like a secret returning home. You find yourself in the olive groves now. Hills blanketed in green-gray trees, their roots old enough to remember stories no one living can fully recall. Some of these trees are older than the mosques, older than the roads. And nestled among them is another kind of memory. One not written in ink or paper, but pressed in oil, baked in bread, whispered from hand to hand. Today, you're stepping into a different kind of message. The language of olives, and what they've always carried in this land. People in Gaza say olives talk, maybe not with words, but with timing, scent, tradition. If you know how to listen, a grove can tell you what season it is, how the weather's been, what families are gathering, and even whether someone is celebrating or mourning. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the soil, a story is always waiting to be dug up. You sit with a farmer who's been working this land since before radios reached the village. He picks up an olive and rolls it between his fingers like a prayer bead. This one, he says, wasn't picked in time. That tells me the family across the valley had a death. That's how I knew before the news came. They didn't harvest. And just like that, the olive becomes a letter. Long before telegrams or newspapers, the olive harvest was a communal calendar. People knew who needed help based on which trees were left untouched. A grove not tended meant illness. A grove too silent meant tension. If one family's trees were unusually full, others came to ask, sometimes to offer help, sometimes to see what had changed. One woman tells you she remembers a year her cousin got married and the entire harvest was delayed. We had to write our announcements on olive branches, she says, half joking, half true. And yes, messages were literally written on olive branches. The custom wasn't widespread, but it happened. Someone would strip a leaf, carve a word into the wood, and send it with a child, or tuck it into a basket. One such branch, preserved in a family chest, bears only a single word. Peace. Its origin is unknown, but the intent still breathes through the bark. There's a fringe story about a couple who secretly communicated by rearranging harvested olives in bowls: green for yes, black for no. Their courtship went on for months before anyone noticed. It ended, tragically, when a goat knocked over a bowl. The next day's message was mixed signals. Literally. Still, olive groves weren't just romantic codebooks. They were meeting points, quiet zones. People would walk between trees to have conversations that couldn't be had at home: talks about marriage, money, migrations. Things too heavy for kitchens and too delicate for. And sometimes, silence in the olive grove said more than words. One elder recounts a story from the British Mandate period. A boy had been arrested for possessing political pamphlets. His family said nothing. But during harvest, they left their olives on the tree far longer than usual, allowing them to wrinkle and deepen. In the village, this was understood as a kind of mourning. Not of death, but of waiting. Historians still argue whether such interpretations were intentional or simply communal projection. But you know better now. In Gaza, messages are always layered, and the land often speaks first. You trail behind a small group of harvesters, now women in patterned scarves, hands moving like music. They aren't talking much, but everything they do is communication. A nod to the left means that tree's done. A click of the tongue means watch your basket. A tossed olive. Well, that depends on the tone. You watch as one woman gently folds a few olives into a cloth pouch, ties it, and slips it into her pocket. Not for oil, not for sale. A message, clearly. When you ask her about it, she smiles softly and says, "These are for someone who doesn't come here anymore." That's all she says. The press house nearby is alive with the grinding of stone, the scent of crushed fruit, the sticky tang of fresh oil. It's loud, almost industrial, but even here, messages travel. You hear of a tradition where the first jar of new oil was always sent to an elder, or to a family that had suffered loss. No label. It's wrapped in cloth and left on their doorstep. You see one of these bundles now waiting on a windowsill. Still warm, no note needed. Sometimes, these bundles carried more than oil. You hear of one woman who sent small pebbles wrapped inside a cloth with each delivery. 2 meant thinking of you. 3 meant please visit. 5, forgive me. 1 was returned once with only 1 pebble. I already have. You walk further uphill, where older groves stretch across terraces like green lace. This is where songs were shared, the harvest chants that passed not just rhythm, but news. A verse added here, a name replaced there. And suddenly a whole village knew who'd returned from Jaffa, or which family just had twins. You hear one such chant now, faintly drifting across the stones. Olives fall, and we remember, hands return from distant towns. Bring your basket, bring your silence. Tell us what the sky won't. No signature, just melody and memory. There's a tradition still whispered today that olive trees remember the voices that spoke beneath them. That if you say something honest under their branches, the wind will keep it safe. A superstition, probably. But when you sit under one now, surrounded by the sound of bees and distant grinding stones, you feel like you're being listened to. And maybe that's all a message really needs a place to land. Before you leave the grove, an old man presses something into your hand. It's a single dried olive. This one, he says, came from a tree that hasn't fruited in 15 years. This year, it gave 1 olive. Just 1. You ask him what he thinks it means. He shrugs. Maybe the land was listening. The wind shifts as you descend from the olive groves, carrying with it the smell of earth and wood smoke. You follow a narrow path back toward the heart of Gaza through crumbling stone archways and sun-faded shop signs. But something has changed. The city feels less like a place you walk through and more like a memory that walks with you. Tonight, you're following the legacy of those messages. The quiet ones. The ones whispered between neighbors, tucked in baskets, etched in fig trees, or carried inside sheep's wool. You're not here to discover what they said. You already know most of that by now. You're here to witness what they left behind. Because even long after the messengers have gone, the message keeps echoing. You pass a school playground, now empty except for a swing creaking in the breeze. A painted mural on the wall shows a giant olive tree with books growing from its branches. And on each book spine, one word: listen, ask, remember, tell. It's part of a modern effort. Gaza's educators today, despite odds that would make most people curl up and cry, teach history the same way it used to be passed, through story, through gesture, through trust. One teacher you meet keeps a box under her desk, faded letters, copied poems, song lyrics scribbled by her students. She doesn't grade them, she just saves them. One day, she says, they'll want to know how it felt to be here, not just the dates, the feeling. And she's right. You move through a neighborhood where kids ride bikes over stones older than their great-grandfathers. You pass a family eating dinner on the rooftop. A father reaches over, drops a folded napkin into his daughter's pocket. She smiles without reading it. You don't know what it says, but you know it matters, because the message culture hasn't disappeared. It's just evolved. There's a teenager with paint on her fingers, tagging the side of a broken wall with poetry. There's a grandmother reciting old chants into a phone for her grandson in Canada. There's a fisherman who scratches coordinates into his oar, because GPS can't be trusted when the sea doesn't want to cooperate. Gaza's communication is still layered, adaptive, invisible when it needs to be. You meet a musician who has rewritten wedding songs into lullabies. The weddings are harder now, he explains. So we sing them gently, for sleep, not celebration. In his little home studio, really just a mattress and two chairs, you listen to a track. The beat is soft, wrapped in oud and distant hand claps. And somewhere in the lyrics is a line you recognize from the Harvest Grove. Tell us what the sky won't. He says kids started quoting it in their school essays. The line has traveled. Just like everything else, historians often struggle to define what's cultural continuity and what's coincidence. But in Gaza, the patterns are clear. The habit of passing messages in quiet ways hasn't ended, it's just grown digital roots. You learn that young people sometimes code their social media captions with the same rhythm their grandparents used in whispered letters. A photo of bread might carry the message, "We have enough." A pomegranate in frame, "We remember." Even emojis become tools. A single olive branch equals peace offering. A shoe equals insult. A candle equals mourning. 3 hearts in a row equals urgent solidarity. It's a new language, but the grammar? Old. You're taken to a makeshift community library tucked into what used to be a clothing shop. Inside are not just books, but recorded oral histories, translated poems, and scanned fragments of letters from before 1948. You listen to one. It's read aloud by a child, but written by a man who left Gaza in 1947. He says, "If this letter finds you, know that I planted a fig tree before I left. I don't know if it's still standing. I just wanted to give something back to the soil, in case I couldn't come home. The tree, they tell you, is still there. It bears fruit." Outside, the call to prayer drifts across the rooftops. It's the oldest message in town. You watch as people pause, not all, but enough, and you realize something. In Gaza, daily ritual is communication. It reminds people that they're still here, still listening, still connected. You stop by a kiosk selling postcards. None of them are mailed anymore. Instead, people write notes and leave them in a box labeled for tomorrow. The idea is simple. Someone, someday, will need these words. You read a few. Don't believe anyone who says we disappeared. I buried my mother's ring. Tell her I still hear her laugh. Forgive yourself for not being brave every day. You write one too. You don't sign it. You just leave it in the box. It feels like the right thing to do. There's one more stop. A museum small, improvised, with more dust than labels. But in a glass case is a display. 2 jars, a faded telegram, and a bundle of fabric. The placard reads, "Recovered from ruins of 1948 home. Messages hidden during evacuation." You ask the curator if she knows what they say. She shakes her head. "We haven't opened them. Some things, they're not for us. You understand now." In Gaza, the message is more than the words. It's the act of preserving them, of carrying them forward, of refusing to let silence win. The sun sets as you walk back toward the center of town. Children play in the dusk. Someone plays a flute. Somewhere, a cat knocks over a flower pot that might have held a note beneath it. And just before you step out of the old city's final gate, you see a wall. It's covered in chalk, scribbles, names, dates, doodles, and one line written large in both Arabic and English. Still here, still writing. The night is full now, deep and thick, but not silent. You move slowly through Gaza's sleeping streets, past closed shutters and quiet courtyards. The buzz of daytime fades behind you, and what's left is the hum of something older, something pulsing beneath stone, beneath memory, beneath the thin skin of modern life. Tonight, you're tracing the afterlives of all those messages. The way they echo, bend, and return through dreams, through rituals, through the things people still do without even knowing why. Because here's the secret. Gaza hasn't just preserved a history of communication, it has turned it into a ritual, a rhythm, a quiet resistance against forgetting. You stop beside a small, crumbling shrine, just a niche in a wall with a clay pot and some melted wax. It's not grand, not marked on any map, but inside the pot, paper, folded, yellowed, messages to no one, or to someone no one speaks of anymore. One says, "I never told him I loved him, so I'm telling the wind." This, too, is a delivery system. Nearby, a group of young women gather by lamplight, weaving together cloth scraps into something like a quilt. But when you ask, they say it's not a blanket tease, a memory map. Each piece holds a note sewn into it. Some are recipes. Some are bits of prayer. One square has only the word "try" embroidered again and again in pale green thread. They don't plan to sell it. They don't plan to use it. They just want to finish it. Across town, an old radio station still broadcasts once a week. The show is called Letters to No One, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Listeners send in messages for people they've lost through war, through migration, through time. A calm voice reads them aloud, slowly, like lullabies. You listen to one. If you're in Damascus, the jasmine bloomed again this year. I wore your scarf when I walked past it. That counts, right? And another. You don't know me, but I live where your family once did. I hope you made it somewhere kind. The station crackles in and out, but the voice keeps going. Gaza doesn't let go easily. You move on to a cemetery not out of morbid curiosity, but because someone told you that the gravestones here sometimes carry hidden notes beneath them. Tiny pieces of paper slipped in by family members. Not part of any religion. It's part of being human. You kneel beside one and see a scrap tucked beneath a stone. I'm raising them the way you asked. There's no wind, but it rustles anyway. And now you're back at the edge of the sea. Yes, Gaza has a sea. You knew that, of course, but it hits different at night. Black waves, bright moon, salt in the air like a warning and a blessing all at once. Here, people have been sending messages in bottles for longer than anyone remembers. Mostly kids, mostly hopes. But sometimes, something heavier. You find an old man who still tosses a bottle every year. Same day, same beach. He laughs when you ask what's inside. It changes, he says. Sometimes it's a joke. Sometimes it's a dream. One time I just wrote, "I'm still trying." That was enough. No one ever writes back. That's not the point. You sit beside him now, and the sea breathes out. You think about everything you've seen: pigeon posts, sugar couriers, coated bread, whispered songs, scratched walls, and cloth-covered jars. You think about all the people who passed notes in baskets between bricks beneath the olive trees. You wonder what message they would want you to carry forward. Maybe it's this: that no message is ever truly lost if someone remembers the rhythm of how it was delivered. And so you close your eyes. You hear the click of a boy's sandals delivering a note. You hear the olive press whispering news in oil. You hear the swish of a skirt brushing past a jar tucked under stone. You hear a grandmother humming last year's names to this year's baby. You hear a radio, just barely, still reading letters into the dark. You hear all of it, and it doesn't stop, because somewhere, someone is still listening. Word count: 1,682. Wind down, let yourself drift, now. Let the rhythm of the night pull you away from the alleys and olive groves, from the small secrets tucked into pottery, from the voices you've followed through the fields and market stalls. The story is still humming behind you softly now. Not gone, just settling down. Imagine the rooftops of Gaza under starlight. The sky stretched like quiet silk overhead, a curtain gently drawn across the day. Imagine a breeze brushing past the shutters just enough to lift the corner of a paper, or to carry a remembered name from one courtyard to another. Maybe in this moment, someone is whispering, just a little. Not to you exactly, but not to you either. Maybe they're saying, "Don't forget what we said. Don't forget we were here. Don't forget we had joy and trouble and jokes. Don't forget the things we passed from hand to hand." The moon leans low now, casting soft light across stone paths. You can almost see a letter left waiting under a rock. You can almost hear the scratch of a poem carved into a fig tree. You can almost feel the warmth of a jar pressed gently into your palm, full of something fragrant and quiet and true. And now, with the world dimmed and your thoughts untangled, you don't need to follow the story anymore. You can just float in it. Let the voices settle. Let the messages sleep. You've heard enough for tonight. The rest will still be here in the morning.